4. That's because he smoked 4 packs of unfiltered cigarettes a day. But my grandmother has just celebrated her 107th birthday. So Anyway, at the end of this program, I thought it went pretty well. And a cameraman gave me a thumbs-up sign, went back to BAI, and we knew it would air in 2 days. And the 2 days passed, and the show didn't air. And people were calling, and I called the show. I said, "What's up?" And they said, there was a problem with the syncing of the video and the sound tracks. And I thought of that, but that cameraman giving me the thumbs-up sign, he didn't seem very concerned. I said, "How did you learn this?" And they said, from 2 stations, Minneapolis and Chicago called and said they couldn't use it. So I said, uh-huh. And they said, "But we'll have you back another time." I said, "Right. You know you can't, because Dr. Yolanda Hewitt-Vaughan was about to be court-martialed. In fact, she served in the brig. She was jailed for 1.5 years, her husband raising their 3 small children alone. The other day we were in St. Louis, and I was giving a talk, and afterwards a young man came up and said, "Would you sign my book?" I said, "Yeah, who do I write it to?" And he said, "My name is Emiliano Hewitt-Vaughan," and he was Yolanda's son. And so, obviously, this show was not going to take place again. So I called these 2 stations in Chicago and Minneapolis, and I asked for the operations director and said, "What's up?" And they said, "Odd, you should ask, since we haven't aired it," but I said I was a concerned viewer. And they said that the Sally Jesse Raphael show had recalled it from New York. So I called back the show, and I said, "The jig's up. I'd like to speak to the executive producer." And they said, "He's a very busy man." So people were just inundating us. "When's the show going to happen?" I said, "Don't call us. Call the Sally Jesse Raphael show." And I guess they got a bunch of calls. No, I guess they got a lot of calls. Maybe hundreds. I don't know, maybe thousands. All I know is that 2 days later, I got a call from a frantic high-level producer who said, "The executive producer would like to talk to you." I said, "I'm a very busy woman." And they asked if I would cry censorship if they edited the program. I said, "Of course not. I'm an editor, too. You have a right. It's your show. I assume you'll edit out Sally's fit." And they did. They did, but the show ran the next day. Because they held it, it ran with headlines that said, "Things Get Messy with Sally Jesse." But the most interesting response I got, and this is, I think, something we learn more and more, how important media activism is. It would never have aired if it weren't for all the people who made this show happen. The most interesting response was from women on Southern military bases who called up to say, "We've never heard this view before on television, and we agree with you. We only whisper it around here," they said. "We can't have these debates on military bases. We rely on you in civilian society." And that's what the media is supposed to be here for, serving a democratic society, sort of like a large national kitchen table that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day: war and peace, life and death. And anything less than that is a disservice to the servicemen and women of this country. Yes, your activism can make an enormous difference. We are living in very dire times right now. Time with the leading up to the invasion of Iraq, where we have a media that has iced out almost all dissent. You look at the week leading up to Colin Powell giving an address at the UN Security Council pushing for war, and the week after, this was February 5th, 2003, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, the Media Watch Group in New York, did a study of those 2 weeks of the 4 major nightly newscasts, NBC, CBS, ABC, and PBS NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. On those 2 weeks of broadcast, there were 393 interviews done around war. 3 were with anti-war representatives. 3 of almost 400 at a most critical time. Now, that you can't even call mainstream media. That is an extremist media, and it doesn't reflect mainstream America, because at that time, most people were opposed to the invasion. They were for more inspections and diplomacy. That is a media beating the drums for war, and that has got to be changed. And then you look at how the media covered the invasion. Just a few small examples. The night, March 19th, that the bombs started to fall, Dan Rather said, "Good morning, Baghdad." And then you had Tom Brokaw of NBC saying, "We don't want to destroy the infrastructure of Iraq because we're going to own that country in a few days." And then you had the networks, not just Fox, but MSNBC, NBC, CNN, all adopting the name that the Pentagon had carefully researched for its propagandistic value, Operation Iraqi Freedom. Actually, they'd come up with another name before, Operation Iraqi Liberation, but they couldn't use it, this according to counterpunch.org, because of the acronym OIL. So they came up with Operation Iraqi Freedom. And you expect that, that's the Pentagon. But for the networks to use the Pentagon's name as the title of their own coverage, you really have to ask, if we had state media in this country, how would it be any different? Right now, the invasion, the occupation, it is so dire. In Fallujah, the minarets being blown up, and the U.S. military saying, well, at least it wasn't the mosque in this city of mosques. The minaret's so symbolic, it's where the call to prayer emanates from, so significant for Muslims all over the world. And what about the people who are dying? The U.S. military says it's insurgents who are dying, and yet the doctors and nurses in the hospital saying, no, it's hundreds of women and children. I mean, when you have these C-150 gunships that are strafing and bombing the whole city, do you think they can pick out the insurgents from the kids? And you have a country now, George Bush has managed to do something Saddam Hussein has never managed to do, and that is unite the Sunnis and the Shia. And now the Sufi clerics, the most apolitical in Iraq, have called for their followers to join the resistance. We know how many U.S. soldiers have died, and it is horrific, more than 700. We don't know how many Iraqi civilians have died. More than 10,000, we believe. And also the injured. More than 18,000 U.S. soldiers have been medically evacuated from Iraq. We don't hear these numbers. But the civilians, the Iraqi civilians, whose numbers we don't know, whose names we don't know, this was the country, these were the people that the U.S. administration said we went in to save and to liberate. It matters, and it matters to the whole world. This week, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is holding hearings on John Negroponte to replace Paul Bremer as U.S. ambassador to Iraq. John Negroponte. What's interesting is you're hardly going to hear anything about this in the media because of how the media works. The media reflects the establishment consensus that is set by the Democrats and the Republicans. Sorry. The media reflects the establishment consensus. Before the invasion, why doesn't this happen when President Bush holds a news conference? Before the invasion, the Democrats agreed with the Republicans, right? Let's not forget John Kerry, John Edwards. They voted for the invasion of Iraq. Now the Democrats are trying to distinguish themselves. And so there is more debate, and that's what the media reflects. It's not that the media has gotten any better. It's that as they follow the establishment in Washington, there's a little more of a division, and that's what they're reflecting. Not so on John Negroponte. People like Christopher Dodd, who objected to him being named U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, now says that he supports John Negroponte. John Negroponte, U.S. ambassador to Honduras, 1981 to 1985. This was the staging ground for the illegal Contra War. Thousands of Nicaraguans killed at this time. Yes, in Honduras alone, the CIA-backed trained Battalion 316, also responsible for the deaths of many Hondurans. One high-level State Department official said in 1982, when he was preparing the State Department report on Honduras, that John Negroponte personally made him purge from it any reference to disappearances and murders, any references to death squads in Honduras. We have continually this week had on the air nuns and priests talking about their personal appeals to Honduran Ambassador John Negroponte at the time for the missing and the disappeared in Honduras. And now this is the man who will most likely be soon approved to be the next U.S. ambassador to Iraq, who will preside over the largest embassy in the world, the largest U.S. embassy in the world, 3,000 people, 500 CIA in Iraq. He will be in charge of counterinsurgency, to give us a picture of what is to come. But now that the Democrats have said they will raise no objection, you know that the media will also not go back and look at the record. We need a media that gives us history, that gives us context, that gives us truth. I just have a few minutes, and I am very eager to hear what Noam has to say. And so I want to end with a story that, well, I first heard about because Noam Chomsky never let this story die, and that is what happened to the people of East Timor and the lesson it provides for all of us. Noam wrote about it from way back, December 1975. Indonesia invaded East Timor, Indonesia invaded East Timor. 90% of the weapons used were from the United States. Henry Kissinger and Gerald Ford, the president then, went to Indonesia, met with Suharto, the long-reigning dictator, and gave the go-ahead for the invasion. What happened after that? Well, the first days, extremely bloody, thousands of Timorese killed. And as Kissinger came back to the United States, he was getting cables from high-level State Department officials saying, we've got to watch out because Congress will cut off military aid to Indonesia. When he came back to the United States, he held a high-level meeting with State Department officials, castigating them for leaving a paper trail saying, we will not kick our ally in the teeth. The note-taker for that meeting, Jerry Bremer, the nickname for L. Paul Bremer. Yes, he learned well at his master's knee. It does matter that we document what happens so that history doesn't repeat itself as we see it happening today. And so the Indonesian military killed off the people of Timor, closing off the country to the outside world. In 1990 and 91, my colleague Alan Nairn and I got a chance to go to East Timor. And in 91, in 90, first saw this hell on earth that was the Indonesian military dictatorship in Timor. In 91, we went back because the UN had finally brokered an agreement that would allow a fact-finding mission to go in and investigate the human rights situation. And we wanted to see what would happen when this delegation came, which never did, because we later learned the US didn't want this delegation to come. On November 12, 1991, we followed a procession of Timorese, thousands of them, from a church to a cemetery, the Santa Cruz Cemetery. They were protesting yet another killing of a Timorese young man, and they carried banners. Girls took them out of their Catholic school blouses that said, why the Indonesian military shoot our church? Old women in traditional Timorese garb, boys in their Catholic school shorts marched through the streets, through this geography of pain. Every other building, a police barracks or a military headquarters or even a hotel where Timorese were disappeared or tortured at the back. And they walked through the streets until they got to the cemetery. When they got there, we talked to people, why are you doing this? And everyone said the same thing, for my father, for my mother, for my village, it was wiped out. And then we saw from the direction the procession had come, hundreds of Indonesian soldiers carrying their US M16s at the ready position. The people were horrified. The soldiers were marching up 12 to 15 abreast. They couldn't escape because there were walls on either side of the road. Alan suggested we walk to the front of the crowd because although we knew that the Indonesian military had committed these massacres in the past, they'd never done it in front of Western journalists, and we thought maybe we could head off the attack. This time, though, I took out my equipment because we'd always hidden it in the past so as not to endanger the Timorese if they were caught talking to Western journalists. I put the headphones on, my microphone above my head. Alan put the camera above his head, and we walked to the front of the crowd. Soldiers marched up.